hum of the engines fades into eerie silence as Captain Julian Cross gazes out at the endless void of space. After decades of thrilling adventures, he's finally ready to retire. But when a distress signal leads him to a mysterious, uncharted station, he stumbles upon something far darker than he ever expected: an underground slave market. The lives of innocent alien women hang in the balance, and Julian is forced to make an impossible decision. With everything at stake, will he risk it all to set them free? Or will his past finally catch up with him? Join Julian on a journey where morality, duty, and a chance at redemption collide in the stars, only on this incredible HFY adventure. If you're new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move to this wonderful story. Captain Julian Cross stood at the helm of his starship, the Elysium, gazing out into the infinite expanse of space. His weathered hands rested lightly on the controls as the vast sea of stars stretched endlessly before him. At 60 years old, Julian had lived a life filled with the kind of adventures most people could only dream of. But now, after decades of traveling across the galaxy, he was ready for something different. He was ready to retire. The Elysium had been his trusted companion throughout his many journeys, a sleek ship with a history as long as Julian's own. It had carried him through countless missions, interstellar trades, and narrow escapes. But today, as he looked out the window of the bridge, there was no excitement, no thrill of the unknown, just a deep, bone-weary longing for peace. He had spent most of his life running from one adventure to the next, but now the only thing he craved was a simple life. He longed for the quiet solitude of a small moon, where he could tend a garden, watch the sun rise and set, and perhaps read a book without worrying about what the galaxy might throw at him next. His hands moved instinctively over the console, adjusting the course to a moon called Verdant Vista. It was a lush agricultural world known for its breathtaking scenery and laid-back lifestyle. Julian had saved up enough over the years to buy a small homestead there. Just a few more days of travel, and he would finally reach his destination. He ran a hand through his thick silver hair, still holding a faint hint of the chestnut brown it had once been. The wrinkles on his face, carved from years of laughter and hardship, reflected his experiences, and his eyes softened as he thought about the peaceful days ahead. But even as he thought about his future, his instincts, honed from years of spacefaring, began to stir. A small blinking light on the console caught his attention. He leaned in, frowning as he saw it was a distress signal. The coordinates came from a small, uncharted island, about half a day's journey off his current course. For a moment he considered ignoring it. After all, he was done with adventures. He had earned his rest. But then, something inside him, something that had guided him through countless missions over the years, refused to let it go. His sense of duty and responsibility overruled his desire for peace. With a sigh, Julian altered the course. Elysium hummed gently as it adjusted, its engines powering up for the new direction. The ship surged forward, leaving behind the promise of restful retirement for the unknown. As the ship moved closer to the island, Julian couldn't shake the uneasy feeling settling in his gut. Something about the readings didn't feel right. The island was too perfectly shaped to be natural, and the energy signatures coming from the area suggested advanced technology, but there were no known settlements in this part of the galaxy. Nothing that should explain these strange signals. Still, Julian pushed forward. He had always trusted his gut, and his gut told him to investigate. He steered the Elysium toward the island's docking bay, his eyes scanning the horizon. As he came closer, he saw the sleek, predatory lines of several ships parked near the bay. They weren't military vessels or anything associated with trade. No, these ships were clearly for luxury, the kind used by the ultra-wealthy. His frown deepened. Luxury yachts in a place like this? Something was definitely off. Julian landed the Elysium with precision, its engines winding down as the ship settled into place. The quiet that followed felt unsettling. There was no bustle, no movement, just the soft hum of the ship powering down. Julian's senses were on high alert. His hand instinctively hovered over the plasma pistol at his side. He stepped out into the docking bay, his boots echoing in the silence. The bay was eerily quiet, save for the low whirring of the station's machinery. Plush carpets lined the floor and expensive artwork adorned the walls. Everything here screamed wealth, but it was a wealth that felt hollow. A sense of emptiness lingered in the air, and Julian felt a chill creep down his spine. He cautiously made his way down a narrow corridor, the light dim and the air thick with an unsettling silence. The station felt like a ghost of what it could have been, opulent but lifeless. As he turned a corner, a muffled sound reached his ears. At first it was barely noticeable, a faint, sorrowful noise that seemed out of place in such an extravagant setting. But as he listened closely, it became clear. It was crying, a quiet, pitiful sound that tugged at something deep within him. His heart pounded as he pushed open a set of ornate double doors. The sight that greeted him was both beautiful and horrifying. A grand hall with towering ceilings and sparkling chandeliers, luxurious beyond belief. But it was the people in the center of the room that drew his attention. There, huddled together in a pitiful group, were dozens of young women, their faces etched with fear. Julian's breath caught in his throat as he saw them, strikingly beautiful, each one from a different alien race. Some had shimmering skin, others glowing eyes, and a few even sported wings or tails. But all of them shared one thing in common: the shackles that bound their wrists and the collars around their necks. It hit him then. The truth he had hoped was not real. This was not a place of trade, but a slave trading post. The women, these beautiful, innocent beings, were being held for sale to the highest bidder. A surge of anger flared within Julian. He may have been an old spacer, but there was still a deep sense of right and wrong within him. And what he was seeing was as wrong as it got. Before he could take a step toward them, a door at the far end of the hall slammed open. A group of armed men stormed in, led by a towering brute with green skin and a cybernetic eye. The slaver sneered at Julian, his voice dripping with disdain. "Well, well," the slaver drawled. "An old man who's lost his way. You've stumbled into the wrong place, Gramps." Julian stood his ground, his eyes hardening with resolve. "I'm no trespasser," he said calmly. "I picked up a distress signal, thought someone might need help, but it seems the only ones in distress here are these girls chained up like animals." The slaver's laugh echoed through the hall. "Distress signal was a glitch," he said, "and these girls, they're not in distress. They're just waiting for their new owners. It's all perfectly legal, I assure you." Julian's fists clenched. "Legal slavery is illegal in every civilized corner of the galaxy. What you're doing here is monstrous." The slaver's eye gleamed maliciously. "Monstrous? No. What's monstrous is letting prime specimens go to waste. These girls are a commodity, old man, and a valuable one at that." Julian's gaze hardened. He was facing a choice now, a choice that would change everything. Julian crossed his arms, his eyes locked with the slaver's cold, calculating gaze. The man before him was clearly used to being in control, to getting what he wanted without question. But Julian was different. He wasn't just any spaceman looking for an easy payday or a quick escape. He was a man of principles, and those principles would not allow him to walk away from what he had just discovered. "You don't understand, do you?" The slaver continued, his voice smooth, almost mocking. "This is how the galaxy works. It's the law of supply and demand. These girls..." He waved his hand dismissively toward the trembling group of women in the center of the hall. "They're worth more than gold. They're rare, exotic. People pay for what they can't get anywhere else." Julian felt his blood boil. He had seen corruption in the stars, but this was beyond anything he had ever encountered. Slavery, exploitation, suffering, all wrapped up in shiny luxury and buried under the guise of legality. This was the kind of evil that could destroy civilizations, and it was happening right in front of him. With a steady breath, Julian unclipped his plasma pistol from his belt and aimed it squarely at the slaver. "I don't care about your laws, and I certainly don't care about your so-called supply and demand," he said, his voice hard as stone. "What I care about is what's right, and this is wrong." The slaver's sneer faltered for a split second, but then he laughed, a dark, guttural sound. "You're one stubborn old man," he said, shaking his head. "But I'll tell you this. You've got two choices. One, you leave now and forget you ever came here. Or two, you can buy these girls, but be warned, the price isn't cheap." Julian didn't flinch. He had already made up his mind. He couldn't walk away from this. Not after what he had seen. Not after what he had heard. The lives of these women, these innocent beings, were in his hands now, and he would do whatever it took to set them free. He glanced at the trembling women, their eyes wide with fear, confusion, and desperation. Their plight had been so different from his own, a life of freedom spent in the stars, while they were trapped in cages, sold like merchandise to the highest bidder. "How much?" Julian asked, his voice calm but filled with a quiet fury. The slaver looked amused at the question, almost as though Julian were wasting his time. "Oh, I see we're getting serious now," he said. "Well, old man, you're looking at a hefty price. These girls aren't cheap. You'd need more than a few 100,000 credits to make a dent." Julian's eyes narrowed, but he didn't hesitate. He was a spacer. Yes, but he had lived a long and profitable life. He had saved every credit from his years of service, every payout, every trade, all of it in a single account. Enough to retire peacefully. Enough to buy a quiet home on Verdant Vista. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small data chip. It contained the access codes to his retirement fund, the sum of everything he had worked for in his life. He tossed it onto the floor at the slaver's feet. "This is everything I've got," Julian said, his voice steady. "I'll pay for their freedom, every last credit, all of it. Let them go." The slaver bent down, picking up the chip with a grin. He plugged it into a scanner, his eyes scanning the information with increasing interest. Julian could see the greed and surprise flicker. In the slaver's eyes, it wasn't every day someone offered to buy a whole shipload of slaves at such an outrageous price. "You're serious, huh?" the slaver muttered as he read the amount on the chip. "Well, this is unexpected. I didn't think you had it in you, old man." Julian kept his gaze fixed on the slaver. "Take it or leave it, but know this. If you leave here today with that data chip, I will make sure every contact I have in the galaxy knows what happened here. Your business will be over." The slaver scowled, his fingers tapping on the chip as he considered his options. He had already gotten far more than he expected, and the thought of losing everything over one transaction clearly irked him. After a long pause, he shrugged, a grin spreading across his face. "You've got a deal," he said, slipping the data chip into his pocket. "You want them free? Fine. But remember, once they're off my station, they're your problem. No refunds, no returns." Julian didn't care about the slaver's words. He just nodded, turning his back and walking toward the trembling women. His heart pounded in his chest as he approached them. They were still wary, their faces filled with uncertainty. But there was something else in their eyes too, a flicker of hope. He gestured for them to come forward. "You're free," he said, his voice soft yet firm. "You're safe now. No one will harm you again." The women exchanged confused glances, unsure whether to believe him. After all, they had been lied to, sold and betrayed so many times before. How could they trust this man who had just bargained for their freedom? But one of them, a girl with soft silver hair and shimmering amber eyes, took a cautious step forward. We don't know how to thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We never thought anyone would come for us. We thought we were beyond saving." Julian smiled at her, his heart aching for the trauma she had endured. "You don't need to thank me," he said gently. "I'm just doing what's right." As the slaver unlocked their shackles, the women slowly stepped forward, looking to Julian for guidance. He took a deep breath and led them back toward the docking bay. The Elysium was waiting for them, its engines humming softly, ready to take them to safety. But as Julian looked back one last time at the dark, lifeless slave station, he couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and uncertainty. He had saved these women, but their journey was just beginning. There were still so many dangers ahead, so many questions left unanswered. Yet, in that moment, As he guided them aboard the ship, he knew one thing for certain. He had made the right choice. The Elysium lifted off, leaving the station behind. Julian's mind raced as he plotted their course to a safe haven, far away from the horrors they had just escaped. And as he looked back at the women, now safe under his protection, he knew that his life had irrevocably changed. He wasn't just a retired captain anymore. He was their protector, and whatever the galaxy threw at them, he would face it head on. The Elysium hummed steadily as it soared through the vast expanse of space, leaving behind the slave station that had been a dark chapter in the lives of those aboard. Julian sat at the helm, his hands steady on the controls, but his mind was far from at ease. The weight of what he had done hung heavily on him. He had saved them, yes, but now what? What did it mean to rescue a group of women from a life of captivity, only to be thrust into the unknown with no clear path ahead? The women, though no longer shackled, were still prisoners of their past. Their eyes were wide with confusion, fear, and a palpable sense of loss. Julian had no illusions that they would recover easily. Their lives had been shattered, and he was now responsible for picking up the pieces. He glanced over his shoulder at the small crew quarters where the women had gathered. Kalen, his longtime first mate and closest companion, was trying to make them comfortable. Kalen had been a soldier before joining the Elysium, a man of few words but steady hands. Julian trusted him with his life, and now it seemed Kalen's calm demeanor was exactly what was needed to keep the women from panicking. But Julian couldn't escape the gnawing feeling in his gut. He had always been a lone wolf, a drifter in the galaxy who never stayed in one place for too long. Now he was faced with the reality of caring for a group of traumatized strangers. He wasn't equipped for this. He was no healer, no counselor. What if he failed them? The silence in the ship was broken by a soft knock on the door of the bridge. Julian glanced up to see Mira, the girl with the silver hair and amber eyes, standing hesitantly in the doorway. She looked fragile, lost, like a bird that had just learned how to fly but wasn't sure where to go. Can I speak with you?" Her voice was soft, tentative, almost as if she were afraid of disturbing him. Julian nodded, motioning for her to come in. "Of course," he said, trying to keep his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "What's on your mind?" Mira stepped into the room, her eyes flicking nervously around the controls, but she didn't sit. She seemed unsure of her place, as though she were still adjusting to the idea that she was no longer a prisoner. Julian gave her a moment to gather her thoughts. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice trembling. For saving us. I don't know how we can ever repay you. I never thought anyone would come for us. We thought we were lost." Julian could hear the raw emotion in her voice, the vulnerability that still clung to her like a second skin. He couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for her. He had known hardship in his life, but this was something entirely different, something he could never fully understand. "You don't owe me anything," he said quietly. It was the right thing to do. No one should ever have to live like that. No one should ever be sold, treated like property. Mira nodded slowly, her gaze lowering to the floor. "We were taken from our planet, from our homes. I don't even know if any of our people are alive anymore. Lumina is gone, destroyed by raiders. We were the last of our kind, and now..." She trailed off, her voice breaking slightly. Julian felt a tightening in his chest. He had heard of Lumina, whispers among spacers about a planet of unmatched beauty, home to a peaceful and ancient race, but he hadn't realized that it had been destroyed, wiped out by the brutal hands of raiders. Now, Mira and her people were the last remnants of their kind. The weight of their loss was impossible to comprehend. "You're safe now," Julian said, though his words felt inadequate in the face of her grief. "I promise I'll do whatever I can to help you rebuild. You won't be alone anymore." Mira's eyes met his, her amber gaze softening slightly, as though she were searching for something in him, something that could offer her a glimmer of hope. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know where we'll go from here, but I think we'll be okay. With you. The sincerity in her voice took him by surprise. Julian had never been much for emotional displays. He had spent most of his life burying his feelings beneath the weight of his duties. But something about Mira's words stirred something deep within him. A warmth, a spark of connection he hadn't expected. He had always been a loner, but now, surrounded by these women, he couldn't deny that he felt responsible for them. They had placed their trust in him, and he wouldn't let them down. We'll figure it out, he said, his voice firmer now. One step at a time. I'll find a place for us to settle. A safe place, where you can heal. Mira smiled, weakly, though the sadness in her eyes never fully left. You're more than a captain to us, she said softly. You're our savior, and we will follow you wherever you go. Those words, simple as they were, hit Julian harder than he expected. He wasn't just a captain now. He was their protector, their guide through this dark chapter of their lives. And that responsibility was something he didn't take lightly. After a long pause, Mira spoke again. There's something else too, she said, her voice quieter now as though she were hesitant to ask. I know we're all still adjusting, but is there any way we could learn how to defend ourselves? We don't want to be helpless anymore. We want to stand on our own 2 feet. Julian regarded her carefully. He had always been a man of action, never one to shy away from a fight, but he had never been a teacher. And yet, he couldn't ignore the strength in Mira's words. These women had been through unimaginable suffering, and yet here they were, asking to learn, asking to be strong again. We'll train, he said simply. I'll teach you everything I know. We'll make sure you're ready for anything that comes our way. Mira nodded, her expression hardening with determination. Thank you, she said again, her voice now filled with a new sense of purpose. As she turned to leave, Julian couldn't help but feel a sense of pride well up inside him. They were survivors, no longer just victims of their circumstances, but fighters, ready to rebuild and reclaim their futures. And with them by his side, Julian knew he was no longer the man he had been when he first set out on this journey. He wasn't just a captain anymore. He was a father figure, a leader, a protector. And for the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose that went beyond the thrill of the stars. As the Elysium glided through the cosmos, Julian turned back to the controls, his mind already mapping out their next steps. There were still so many dangers ahead, but with Mira, the other women, and his loyal crew, he was ready for whatever came their way. They weren't just survivors of a shattered past anymore. They were a family, and together, they would face whatever the galaxy had in store. The Elysium cut through the vast emptiness of space, its engines humming steadily as Julian Cross steered the ship toward their destination. The familiar hum of the ship's systems provided a strange comfort, yet Julian couldn't shake the nagging feeling that their journey was far from over. The women, his newfound family, were safe for the moment, but the shadows of their past still lingered in their eyes. They had been broken, and though they had begun to heal, the scars would never fully disappear. As the days passed, Julian found himself adjusting to his new role. He had always been a solitary figure, drifting through the galaxy with no real attachment to anyone or anything. But now that had changed. The women who had once been nothing more than strangers to him were now integral parts of his life. He felt responsible for their well-being, and a protective instinct that had long lain dormant began to awaken within him. Kaylin, ever the steady hand, was his closest confidant. The two of them had worked together for years, and now, in this strange new chapter, Kaylin became more than just a first mate. He was a brother, a companion in this uncertain journey. The ship's crew, though small, had been loyal and efficient, but Julian knew that it was the bond they shared with the women that would define their future. The women, especially Mira, the silver-haired beauty with the amber eyes, were beginning to settle into their new life. The uncertainty that had once filled their expressions was slowly giving way to a quiet determination. Julian had shown them the way forward. He had promised them safety, and he intended to keep that promise. But the weight of their situation wasn't lost on him. He knew that the road ahead would be far from easy. They had escaped one nightmare, but there were more dangers lurking in the vastness of the galaxy. The Elysium was only a small ship, and with its cramped quarters and limited supplies, they were running on borrowed time. They needed a place to call home, a sanctuary where they could rebuild their lives. One evening, as the stars glittered, outside the cockpit, Julian sat alone in the command chair, staring out into the endless expanse. The ship was quiet, save for the soft hum of the engines and the occasional distant crackle of static over the comms. It was in moments like these that the silence became deafening. He thought about the women, about Mira and the others, and about the life they had lost. He thought about how they had looked to him for guidance, for safety, and how he had promised them everything. "We need to find a place," Julian muttered to himself, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "A real home, a place where they can heal, where they can live free." Just as he was lost in his thoughts, a soft voice broke through the stillness. "Captain?" It was Mira, her voice hesitant, yet filled with a new sense of purpose. Julian turned to face her, and for a moment he saw a flicker of hope in her amber eyes. The girl who had once been so fragile, so broken, was no longer the same. "Mira," he said, gesturing for her to come closer. "What's on your mind?" She stepped forward, her movements graceful despite the weariness that still clung to her. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice steady now. "We've come so far, and yet we still don't have a place to truly call our own. We need more than just safety, Captain. We need a future." Julian nodded slowly, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. "I know," he said. "That's been weighing on me too. But where do we go from here?" Mira hesitated, then spoke again, her voice soft but full of conviction. "I've heard stories about a place, a planet on the edge of the Orion Nebula. It's uncharted, isolated. No one really knows about it. But it's said to be a paradise, a place untouched by the chaos of the galaxy. I think it's where we need to go." Julian considered her words carefully. The idea of an uncharted planet was enticing. They needed a place where they could truly start over, a place where the remnants of their past wouldn't follow them. He didn't know if this place was real, but it was worth a shot. "If it's a paradise, then it's worth the risk," Julian said finally. "We'll head there. But we need to be cautious. We don't know what we'll find." Mira smiled, a small, hopeful expression that made Julian's heart ache. "Thank you, Captain. We'll make it work. I know we will." Over the next few days, the Elysium altered course, heading toward the mysterious planet Mira had spoken of. As the ship traveled through the dark void of space, Julian couldn't help but think about the women who now called the ship their home. They were all survivors, and together, they had forged a bond that went beyond mere gratitude. There was something deeper, something unspoken, that connected them all. As they neared the Orion Nebula, the stars around them seemed to shimmer with a new intensity. The dark expanse of space gave way to the swirling colors of the nebula, a cloud of gas and dust that stretched for light years. The Elysium cut through the nebula, its sensors on high alert as they navigated through the thick clouds. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the ship broke through the nebula's haze, and a small, lush planet appeared before them. It was everything that Mira had described, a paradise, untouched and serene. The surface was covered with vast forests, crystal clear lakes, and rolling hills that seemed to stretch endlessly. It was a place of peace, a place that seemed to promise a fresh start. Julian guided the Elysium toward a clearing near a large lake, setting the ship down gently on the soft earth. As the engines powered down, the crew disembarked, the women following behind. Mira, Kaylin, and the others stepped off the ship, their faces alight with wonder and relief. They were home. The days that followed were filled with hard work. Julian, Kaylin, and the women worked together to build shelter and secure food. The planet's rich resources made it possible for them to grow crops, gather water, and create a sustainable life. They built small huts by the lake surrounded by gardens of fruits and vegetables that the women had never seen before. There, New life, though hard, was filled with promise. As the weeks turned into months, Julian watched as the women found their footing in this new world. Mira, now more confident than ever, took on a leadership role, helping the others learn how to survive in their new environment. Leora, another of the women, discovered a natural talent for healing, using the planet's herbs and plants to create medicines for the group. Asha, with her quick wit and infectious smile, found ways to keep everyone's spirits high. Julian couldn't help but marvel at their strength. These women were no longer the fragile, broken beings he had rescued from the slave station. They had become warriors in their own right, building a life from nothing and finding hope where there was none. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the planet, Julian sat with Mira by the lake. They were quiet, content in each other's presence. The stars above them glittered in the clear sky, a reminder of how far they had come. "This is it, isn't it?" Julian said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "This is home." Mira nodded, her amber eyes reflecting the stars. "Yes, it is. It's perfect. We're free now. We're no longer bound by the past." Julian smiled, his heart swelling with pride. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he had found something worth fighting for. The journey ahead would be challenging, no doubt, but with Mira and the others by his side, he knew they could face whatever came their way. "We're a family now," he said softly, "and together, we'll build something that no one can take away from us." As the evening faded into night, the small group of survivors stood together under the stars, bound not just by their past, but by the future they would create. The galaxy had thrown its worst at them, but they had survived. And now, in this quiet corner of the universe, they would make their own destiny.